warm welcome to all our viewers and welcome to a new edition of Africa Today, our show bringing you all the latest news and events happening inside Africa. My name is Angie Meher and as usual, we begin straight away with a look at some of the news making the headlines, and we start with the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation that has hailed the distinguished ties between Egypt and South Africa on all levels, asserting Cairo's keenness on promoting cooperation amongst African nations through achieving higher interests of all the people on the Black Continent. This came during a meeting with South African Minister of Water and Sanitation, Senzo Mchunu, at the new premises of the Irrigation Ministry at the new administrative capital. Meetings among African countries have been witnessing intensive activities in the face of the many challenges facing the African continent. And today, of course, discussing ties between Egypt and Africa. We're delighted to be joined over the telephone by our guest for this afternoon, Minister, His Excellency Ambassador Ayoub Mahmoud Ayoub, Minister Plenipotentiary Commercial. A very good afternoon to you, Your Excellency.
Good afternoon to you and to the viewers.
Thank you very much, sir, for your time and for joining us. And let me start, Mr. Ambassador, by asking you about, the flurry of diplomatic activity between Egypt and many African states that we have seen, and how this has worked to develop ties between Egypt and the African continent as a whole, sir.
Africa is very important for Egypt.
Yes.
Historically and from many points of view, strategically and from economic point of view. That is why the President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi himself has presided the COMESA and the African Unity Organization of Unity lately in the last couple of years. And Egypt is putting Africa in the front of its interest and is focusing on relations with Africa, not only from strategic point of view, but also from economic, cultural, and technological perspectives.
Indeed.
That is why Africa is important for Egypt, and we have mutually beneficial relations with all African countries, whether the blocks in the East and West and South Africa, or bilaterally with most of the countries over the African continent, whether in Sub-Sahara or in North Africa. Africa is vital for the present and the future, and Egypt did not waste time in bolstering relations with most or all the African countries, especially from economic and commercial perspective.
Indeed. Now, sir, the latest cooperation between Egypt and African nations has helped the continent as a whole reach several milestones, especially with regards to development in light of the global challenges that are witnessed all around the world as a result, of course, of the post-COVID-19 era and the Russian-Ukrainian war, and issues related to security, food security specifically, agricultural development, etc. How do you see Egypt playing a pivotal role in the development of such these sectors in different African countries?
You said it. Food security, stability, and peace in Africa is vital to Egypt. We entered in several cooperation agreements and bilateral agreements and multilateral agreements with African countries to bolster trade and economic relations with these countries to safeguard the interests of Egypt, whether from a strategic point of view or from a commercial or economic point of view. And the result was quite positive as far as Egypt is concerned, and also for the African countries. The bilateral trade agreements and multilateral trade agreements between Egypt and these countries it was mutually beneficial for both parties. That is why Egypt is putting Africa at the front of its interests since 3 or 4 years ago and until now, and the results was quite positive as far as trade relations with the countries. When we see the increase in trade, when it is doubled the volume of trade with these countries, it means that these countries are looking towards Egypt as a source of know-how, trade,
yes,
economic cooperation, technology transfer, and also Egypt already have investments in many of these sub-Saharan countries, starting from Uganda, and Tanzania. We have constructed a dam in Tanzania, and we are helping, and even in Rwanda. So Egypt is lending a hand of mutually beneficial relationship with African countries, which is quite felt by these countries as far as the present and future economic relations are concerned.
Absolutely. Your Excellency, you mentioned a very important issue on an economic level, and Egyptian investments in Africa have now reached $10.2 billion US. How do you see the jump in Egyptian investments in African countries in light of this number? And what are some of the main sectors that we're seeing Egyptian investments in branching out into?
Egypt has invested heavily in many of the African countries, starting from Uganda and the other countries.
Yes.
And this is very important, not only for Egypt, but also for the African countries. When we have seen a big company, contracting company, I will not mention the name, of course, has established many, let us say, many important infrastructure projects in these countries. This means that these countries know that Egypt is...
Hello, Mr. Ambassador? Hello? Right. We do seem to have run into a technical difficulty with the phone. Hopefully we'll get His Excellency back on the line. But till we do so, we can take a look at some more news making headlines in the African continent, where the UNA Chief Martin Griffiths said the crisis in Sudan will require sustained financial support, expressing hope that Sudan can be kept at the top of priorities. Griffiths was speaking at a fundraising conference hosted by Germany, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, and the United Nations. We have more details in this story.
International donors on Monday pledged close to $1.5 billion in humanitarian aid to Sudan and other broader region, responding to a call by the UN to boost aid amid a conflict that has forced some 2.2 million people from their homes. The UN said $3 billion were needed this year for humanitarian relief inside Sudan and for refugees fleeing the country, only a fraction of which had been funded. UNA Chief Martin Griffiths told a fundraising conference hosted by Germany, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, and the UN. He said the crisis will require sustainable financial support. Germany announced on Monday that it was pledging 200 million euros to Sudan and the region until 2024. The US pledged $171 million and Qatar pledged $50 million. The UN said it was allocating an additional $22 million to address priority needs. The war between Sudan's army and its paramilitary Rapid Support Forces RSF began in mid-April amid tensions over an internationally backed plan for a transition towards elections under a civilian government.
And for more news, the United Nations Refugee Agency warned against a rising number of refugees fleeing the conflict in Sudan and said over 500,000 people have fled the country, while 2 million are internally displaced. We have the details.
The head of the UN's refugee agency, Filippo Grandi, said on Tuesday that the number of people who have fled the fighting in Sudan was now more than 500,000, while 2 million are internally displaced. He said, quote, "Today we passed the mark of 500,000 refugees from Sudan following the beginning of the conflict." He was speaking at a press conference in Nairobi. The UN official said also that 2 million people are displaced inside the country. The conflict in Sudan has left more than 3,000 people dead, turned the capital Khartoum into a war zone, and triggered deadly violence in the conflict-scarred western region of Darfur as well as other parts of the country.
And ladies and gentlemen, with this final news item, we have to wrap up today's edition of Africa Today. We hope you've enjoyed it, and join us again tomorrow just after 2 p.m. for a new edition. You're in the company of myself, Angie Meher. Many thanks for joining us.